Hello, everyone. I'm Carter Foster. I'm Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs at the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Texas, Austin. And welcome to our series, Curated Conversations. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome Sedrick Huckaby, whose work is currently on view at the Blanton. Sedrick, you want to turn your camera on? There you are.
Yeah.
Hi, Sedrick. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to see you.
It's good to be here.
We have a nice crowd, like almost 130 people. That's good.
Awesome.
So we'll get to the conversation in just a second. I'm going to just say a few housekeeping things. Your audio is muted if you're in the audience, so no one can hear you, and only the panelists are visible on the screen. Closed captioning is available by clicking the live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll be taking your questions from the Q&A window, so you please use that, not the chat function. And we'll stop at the end and take questions, but we may answer questions as they come, depending on how the flow goes. And then finally, tonight's event is being recorded, and it'll be available on our website and on our YouTube page, where we have a ton of content from a lot of our past curated conversations. So please subscribe to us on our YouTube channel and look at that content. So we'll get started now, and I'm going to just give a brief bio of Sedrick, and then we'll pull up some images of his work and from the exhibition. So it's always funny to read a bio when someone's looking right at you. Sedrick is a Fort Worth-based painter. He was born in Fort Worth and still lives and works there. He works in painting, sculpture, drawing, and printmaking. He received his BFA from Boston University and his MFA from Yale University. He's been the recipient of grants and fellowships from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Tiffany Foundation, and the Guggen Foundation, among many others. He's in a number of major museum collections, including the Whitney, the Amon Carter here in Texas, the Nasher in North Carolina, the Art Institute of Chicago, SF MoMA. And next year, he'll be in an exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery called Kinship, but he's been in many other exhibitions. He's represented by Valley House Gallery in Dallas and by Philip Martin Gallery in Los Angeles. So welcome, Sedrick.
Thank you.
That's a brief bio. I thought I would ask before we look at images, I thought I would ask first about your maybe your relationship to art history and the medium of oil painting, because I think I consider you a virtuoso with oil paint. I think you get to a psychological depth with your portraits that is possible in part because of the way oil paint functions as a medium. And I know you spent some time in Europe studying the history of oil painting in museums at one part of your career. So I wondered if you would just mind talking about what you think of oil paint and why you feel like it's such a good medium for you.
There's every medium has its importance, especially in contemporary art, and nothing can be taken for granted. Like, I think we take painting for granted. We just say oil painting and it's just, but even using the choice to use oil paint as a medium is a choice to connect to the history of oil painting. And I think about that particularly because that history of art is one that I've come to know and to study and to have a profound respect for. And that was the reason for the studying of the old masters in Europe. It was to come into a closer contact with their work, to see it, to study it in person, and to be able to glean from it things that I thought were important in terms of painting. And so, yeah, I have a connection to oil painting, like as a medium. It's the way that I connect to the history of art.
What do you have any particular, when you were copying in Europe, how did you go about picking the work you wanted to copy? Was it just like you walk through the museum and something would strike you and you just would decide on that one? Or did you have any particular artists that really stood out for you?
there's a number of artists that I've come to know and love, and that really I was studying and looking at when I was there. But in terms of pieces that I copied, it was where I was allowed to copy.
Yeah.
Not every place you could.
Right.
But there were some paintings that I was allowed to work from. And so, you know, I chose from some of those, but also a part of my practice was really looking at the works and studying them, and then going back to my studio apartment and making works that were influenced by those works.
Right. Let's start with the first image, Christian, if you want to share your screen and put this up. So this is one of your studios, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
This is a place that we're working to erect called Kinfolk House. And it's a collaborative art space that is set to open up in February of next year. And I work over there in spurts. And some of the works, there are some works that I'm working on in that space, but the space is actually a place that my wife and I are working on to become this collaborative art space where creatives of different genres can come together and create, and then engage the community with that collaboration.
That's great. And I should say your wife's also a very accomplished artist, who's shown a lot around Texas. And I thought maybe since this is on the right, we see a portrait of one of your family members, your son, the work on the left. I thought maybe you could talk about painting from life and what that means to you and why that's an important part of your practice, and how painting from life is different than other types of painting from a living human being sitting in front of you.
Well, so that's multi-layered in this sense. In one sense of the word, or the idea of painting from life, it connects you with that history of people who worked from life. And in that sense, you know, there is just like a connection to art through the process. So you connect with those people who thought it was important, in the way that they went about doing what they do was by putting an eyeball on somebody. In another sense, it's just it's a different thing. It's almost like collaborating with that person when you're painting that person, because they're bringing their energy, they're bringing their personality. And yes, like it's a person lives, they move, they have to, you know, there's all of this the stuff of painting something living that is different than painting from like source material, like a picture. So I really like when I can engage an actual person. I have painted using photographs as a reference, but I prefer, and I try to push for those moments of being able to work from the person, because it's just another kind of energy. It's a little more of a challenge because you are working for life, but it offers more into, like, as the artist, it offers me more opportunity to translate, you know, and try to engage the person and really see the person. And how do you like deal with a living person breathing in front of you, and their, you know, their movements and personality, and the whole process of like engaging a person is just tremendously different. And when it works, it's tremendously engaging and rewarding. When it doesn't work, it's tremendously frustrating.
Yeah, sure. And you're not working from professional models. You're working from your family members, people you know, people that aren't maybe not necessarily in the art world or anything. They're people.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
they're usually like just people who don't know how to model.
Have you ever had anyone be surprised with how you depicted them, with how they looked, and after you ended up?
Yeah, it happens because I'm not always accurate. I try. It's just that's part of the challenge, if you will, is you get in front of a person and you start working, and how to actually get it right. There are some artists who are so masterful that each and every time they do. But with the process that I use, some of the processes that I use, like it involves a lot of paint a lot of times.
It does.
And you're swimming with paint, and it's like moving and squishing, and like how to make that into somebody that's another whole issue.
Yeah, paint and flesh are not the same thing yet. Paint is a good translator of flesh tones in some ways, I think. But talk about the way because you often build up a very, very thick surface with your paint and use a really heavily loaded brush. And I assume that's both time consuming because oil paint takes a long time to dry, and there's something about that you must like that helps you get to something of the essence in the person.
I do. I like thick impasto. There was a moment I remember. I remember it like loading up my brush and just kind of squishing it onto the painting and start moving it around. And then I started discovering that I can paint into it. The paint I can paint literally lay paint on top of another layer of paint, or mix down into it, or scrape it all off.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly liberating just to like see the paint move around and swirl around until it became something. But over time, I've come to learn to like many different painting applications, and you will see it in painting. You'll see some of the paintings where paint is splashing around. You'll see where it's like swirling and squishing around. You'll see it like old and like scumbled over the top, or you'll see it wet into wet and all fluid. I've learned to appreciate many different approaches, glazes, and etc. And to use them where I can and where it makes sense.
Well, it looks immensely gratifying. Just like it would be gratifying to complete one of your paintings. Let's go to the next image, Christian. So here's an image of the exhibition, and we're looking at a painting called A Love Supreme, which is part of a series of large-scale paintings, fall, winter, spring, and summer. They're all related to seasons, so it's like a cycle. And on the left of that is a painting called Sonodorus. But let's go to the image we have of A Love Supreme. And this is summer. So I was so struck in looking at these the first time with the others that, you really did make them feel like summer, spring, fall, winter. You use these colors that are in a really wonderful way. This is the first work I saw a work like this by you first in 2006 at the Studio Museum in Harlem at a show called Frequency, I believe, that was curated by Thelma Golden. And I was really blown away. I never forgot this painting. I was so struck by how it was a kind of approach to abstraction in some ways, because quilts are abstract objects in a way. But you're depicting a quilt, you're using a very shallow space. So there's a kind of, confluence of the surface of the quilt and the surface of the painting, but not quite. And I just loved all that. And not the least of which, it's just beautifully painted, incredible colors, and the scale is huge. So, and this is only 1/4 of the size of the whole cycle. So it's actually a lot bigger. So maybe talk about why you first started painting quilts and what quilts mean, and maybe about this painting specifically.
So I first started painting quilts because my grandmother was a quilter, And when I first started doing it, they were sort of in the background of paintings, and I would paint like a still life or something in front of the quilt. And once I got to college and I started studying it more and thinking about it, it's kind of like that old thing they say where a fish in the water doesn't know they're in the water. And this was something that was a part of my heritage, like this whole quilting tradition. And because we grew up with them, we were laying in these quilts on our beds. And when we went to my grandmother's house, they were wonderful. You can see they're wonderfully colorful and beautiful objects, but I didn't know how special they were until I started studying them outside of my family. And once I sort of came to that consciousness about like how these were cultural objects, how like aesthetics were handed down in these quilts, you could see like the that they were they're not symmetrical. They're sort of like asymmetrical, and they're sort of offbeat phrasing, if you will. I've often called them the jazz music of the Black woman, because they carry many of the same aesthetics that we see in jazz music, but women at a certain period in our history were more responsible for creating the quilts. So you see that same aesthetic that men were using in the music, women were using in this art form of quilt making.
And you mean like improvising to a degree where you like grab this piece of fabric or that one, and the shape will be improvised based on the shape that's next to it or something like that?
Yeah, there was improvisation. There's offbeat phrasing. There is the high affect color that you see here, the melodious color. There is this use of this kind of like the way that they're not, they are asymmetrical, that they are like complex groupings. And then at the same time, there's things that about them that are rather simple. And there is, along with that, a kind of use what you have aesthetic that comes from poor folk. And you will see all these same qualities in some of the jazz music, the improvisation, the offbeat phrasing, the way that even some of the instruments that they ended up sort of bringing together in early jazz. It's very, one of the things, if you look at quilts by Betsy Wells, and then you go and look at the paintings of God, I'm drawing a blank here. Mondrian.
Yeah.
Though that look at the Broadway Boogie Woogie, when he was influenced by jazz music, what it did to his composition, and then go and look at Betsy Wells, who was doing the same thing, but years before him.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Yeah.
That same aesthetic is what you see in the way that they put together these quilts. Though, and you could go throughout the South and you'll see like this loud pink house in the country, or this loud yellow house on top of a hill somewhere. And it's the same aesthetic. Since my grandmother was a quilter and we still had a lot of the quilts, I would gather together some of these quilts from family members and create paintings from her quilts. And it was a way of creating a aesthetic conversation. Me as an artist talking to, in a certain sense, her as an artist. Mm-hmm. And these conversations between us and art.
You're interpreting her work essentially in this painting.
Yes.
Are all the quilts in this whole cycle made by your grandmother?
Not all.
That's a lot of quilts.
She made a lot of quilts, and a lot of them are my grandmother's. Many of the ones in the spring quilt are made by Letitia's great-grandmother, my wife's great-grandmother. And so there are the introduction of some others, but my grandmother is probably the overwhelming source of the quilts.
So there's a question, someone's asking about GSB quilts, which I assume you're familiar with, but what did you think when they were kind of discovered? There was a big show that toured around, and I just wondered what you thought of that whole phenomenon.
Well, I think what was so phenomenal to people about those quilts was that what the GSB quilters were doing in these old quilts. The thing about them was that they were doing what they could see artists doing in abstract paintings, but they didn't understand how they had this understanding of like color composition, this sort of sophisticated understanding of like how to put things together in unusual ways that didn't follow like any kind of usual pattern. Like they were so unusual, and they had the sophistication of painters that understood all these things of fine art. And so that's what people were so enamored about, was that these quilters seemed to be doing it without having the same influences. They didn't figure, they're thinking, they didn't see they didn't know about contemporary art, and they didn't know about, but they had this aesthetic that was passed down generation and generation by generation. And that's how they knew it. That's how they understood the complexity of what they did. And it was not just in quilts, but you would find that it went across the culture.
They were working by instinct and by, yeah. Let's go to the next image, Christian. Let's go to the next. I love this painting. I really do. I love the fact that it's called Filthy Rags of Splendor. So it has this kind of contrasting, like splendor and filthy in the same line. It's the back of a quilt, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. And so many times, I was painting so many kinds of quilts. Quilts are usually known, one of the things people love about quilts are their vibrant color. But some of the quilts that I painted also were sort of harmonious and earth tones with a little spot of color here or a spot of color there. But on this one in particular, on the back side of it, it didn't have any patches. It was just a piece of fabric that was old and it was worn. And but always very interesting to me and always very beautiful to me. I keep seeing as I'm handling the quilt. And at a certain point in time, I just thought, you know what? I just want to paint that. I've painted a lot of patches and I painted a lot of colors, but I love what's going on with essentially one big patch and this modulation of subtle color that went across it.
And you catch it. It looks beautiful here, but it looks even more beautiful in person. So I hope people will go see it. And then it's so interesting. It plays on the whole tradition of monochrome painting. It's not totally monochromatic, but it's close in tone. Makes me think of people like Agnes Martin, especially not the least of which is that you're painting, fabric, which is a grid. It's a grid of threads, so it relates to this kind of idea of maybe a modernist grid. And then I've had discussions with other people about this painting. Not you, I don't think, but someone mentioned there's a famous painting by Rembrandt of a carcass of beef that's hung up, and it definitely reminds me of that. That was also copied by Kaim Soutine, another French artist. And then people have asked me about Christ and the veil of Veronica, and the fact that it seems like it's the quilt's being crucified, maybe, which I don't know if that's what you meant, but it certainly is a valid reference, I think, to think about, and a really beautiful one.
Well, and those are, when you look at it, one of the things about it is that the color at times does look like flesh. It has a fleshy tone.
Yeah.
And how it's hanging there
Yeah.
It does make us think figuratively about it. At least it made me think about it in that way. And the contrast, like you're talking about, the filthy and the splendor. I think that's the wonderful thing about quilts, is that they have embedded in them all sorts of language and all sorts of things that went along with the culture and the time that we could discuss. But they also have the ability to be able to discuss many issues, many like things. They have the ability to like be metaphors, where I could talk about the crucifixion of Christ, and at the same time, be able to talk about a handed down tradition or a covering that covered and was worn and torn because of years of use, and be able to tie together like some pretty complex issues under the veil of a quilt.
And they're like, in a way, they're portraits of who made them. You know, they're
Yes.
allegorical portraits of who made them, and in some ways of the people they've comforted. Because you talked about one time to me about it's like a second skin that wraps around you, and the body, the human body is inherently implied, in an image of the quilt.
It is. And like when we look at that piece, filthy rags, it literally looks like hands or have touched it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just look at it, it looks like it's been touched, like, and held and squeezed. And I think that's just the look. It's so like it's very old and frail, but the fact that it has a sense of like the hand. Quilts are all about touch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next image. Christian, thank you. Go. Okay, so now we'll get to the show has these two quilt paintings in it, which I think you just sort of allude to the fact that they're metaphors for community in many ways. And when we first started talking about the show, I started looking at paintings of people sitting in front of quilts or standing in front of quilts. But why don't you talk about the other works in the show are portraits. And this one's called Sonodorus. And why don't you talk about this painting?
This is just a beautiful family. And a lot of times I have a number of paintings where it's multiple paintings that come together to make one piece. And this is one of those pieces. And a lot of times I use that metaphorically, like I try to, I believe this is the only one that I ever done with where two figures occupy one space. And then usually they're one figure per painting. It's a way of talking about how people have their own space, and yet they come together collectively to be unified. So it's a way of dealing with unity and variety, like a group and the particularity of individuals. Here you have the two parents, and then the two children are painted separately, but both sort of like just right there, like connected together. And you see connections between the pieces. The same framing on the young lady's painting is on the painting with the two, and then the young man, that sort of golden frame around him sort of has a conversation with that painting behind the two parents. It was a painting that dealt with Sonodorus is word for dreamers, Spanish word for dreamers. And during this time, there was a lot going on with people those who belong to the group that we call dreamers here in the nation, who they were born, children were born here. And at this point in time, there were a lot of people being, I want to say, like, forced, harassed in some kind of ways, but some like being sort of forced to it was either a breaking up of the family, some people being sort of threatened to have to leave the nation and go either, to Mexico, back to Mexico or something, after they've spent all their, in many cases, the children, all their whole lives here. And there were programs set up to help them be able to transition here. And then suddenly, at the drop of a dime, with the change of the political scene here, things just went quickly in another direction. It was a very threatening kind of time where people felt threatened, families felt pushed and threatened. And so the whole point here was to show this family of dreamers and to talk about their unity, talk about their variety, but maybe more importantly, their beauty as a family.
I always, when I talk about this exhibition or give tours to people, I always talk about, I feel like you're evoking the way people show photographs in their home of each other, in a sense, like with different frames, and like it's often on a tabletop where there is a kind of layering effect. And I assume that's what you were thinking.
Exactly.
I love that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I also struck by the painting that you painted in the background of the parents. It's got Sedrick Huckaby's signature, but it looks like a painting by an artist named Martin Johnson Heed. And I don't know if you copied a specific work by him or if you had a reference point, but he's a famous American 19th century painter. And I think by putting them in front of a famous American painter, this is my interpretation, I might be wrong, you're like, you're talking about belonging and the fact that they are in this country and are in America and are part of American history. So,
I won't destroy that interpretation.
Okay. But I love it, the painting within a painting, and that it's signed by you, which you can see actually by the man's head. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next image. So this is the other portrait group that's got a similar sort of presentation. You present them on a shelf. They're very large, but they do have this, they still to me evoke the kind of family photograph display that we were talking about. And this was and this includes a self-portrait of you on the right. Certainly looks like you. You got yourself pretty good there, Sedrick. Even though you have a longer beard, it looks like. But why don't you talk about this project and what gave you the idea for doing a piece called the Huckabyes?
So for years, I have painted about families, usually the African American family or the Black family. But as you see in Sonodorus, that was not a Black family, but it was a talking about family. And here, this was a sort of exploration of just what family is. The Huckabyes, this is a portrait of like the family that I know, my mother, my father. You see the self-portrait, but the other Huckabyes in the picture, they share the same name as us, the same spelling with the ABY, and they live in the same neck of the woods, the same city. We've seen them in newspapers from time to time. Maybe they've seen me in newspapers from time to time, I'm not sure. And it was an exploration of that connection because in many cases, Black families have connections to and maybe white families and maybe everybody else. There is this large interconnection that happens when, like, you think about things that they have around today, like they have these sort of what do they call it? Like all of the explorations of DNA and of family history.
Oh yeah, like 23andMe and all that
23andMe, and where people are discovering that their family lineage is much more broader than, you know, like we know or that we are in contact with. And the question is, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
You know, what do we do with the fact that our families are many times are not, especially in the United States of America,
Yeah.
you know, that maybe our families are more complicated than what we celebrate, than what we know. And when we find that, what do we do with that? Well, the piece here was just, it was my a little bit of a search to contact these Huckabyes, to have a discussion with them, and to create a portrait together. And like 2 steps down that journey road of saying, here we are together.
Yeah. It's also, I think it's also what you look like is not how people define, or what your genetic code is not how you're defined. You're often defined by how you look superficially, but you might have a completely complex thing going on that we can find out now through these services. And indeed, Henry Louis Gates has a whole TV show about this, which is interesting.
There's many things, and like I think you know, I don't know where the end leads to, but I would think that we would find that we're more connected than we know.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go to the next image. Oh, here's a small. Well, we found this small version of that, which I thought was really beautiful, and also is really the size of little snapshot photographs. So, was this a study for that painting?
It was.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Well, so someone asked about this painting in the Q&A, so we're answering one of the Q&A questions. But of course, I'm sure a lot of people are curious about why you painted George Walker Bush and about your relationship with him. You actually were his painting teacher. So I'm sure people would love to hear a little bit about that. And then we'll try to get some questions.
Okay. Well, I would ask how many people knew that his middle name was Walker? Or did people think his middle name was W?
Right, because it was such an issue, such a flashpoint during his presidency.
And I bring that out because most people would say W, George W. Bush. That's who the person is. But the W stands for something, stands for Walker. And the reason I bring that out is because I think that that's a little thing that says, maybe the people that we know, if we like him, somebody who's such a public figure, right? There's more than what you know about a person who's a public figure. That, you know, and I knew him because of painting. Like you just stated, I was his painting teacher. And every now and then I'll go back and look, I'll come and look at his work with him. But at a certain point in time, I was working with him very closely when he was working on the group of paintings, A Portrait of Courage. And after that, I've sort of looked at and helped critique his work. And in the process of that, I I did this portrait of him from life. And I've done 3 portraits of him, all of which were from life. And I think they're the only ones of him done from life. And the thing that I've discovered, and the thing that I hope the simplicity of the painting sort of speaks to, is that you don't see this portrait of the man with the formal clothes on, the tie, the suit, or as the Oval Office person. This portrait looks like just another person. And that's what the portrait that I was trying to paint here is, trying to paint the portrait of him as just another person. And because I think that we've all come to know him, through public policy, through decisions made in Oval Office and such. But this portrait is coming from a place of just knowing him as just another person. And, going over and teaching him painting and having conversations and talking face to face with the former president. And that's why it's painted in the way that it is. And that's why it's lists his full name, so that it can be seen that he can be looked at from another angle, which is, I suppose, the angle that I'm looking at him from when I'm painting this portrait.
You paint in a variety of scales. You paint in small scale and large scale, but you paint often in very large scale, which is very impressive. And I wonder what scale means to you. Like, why do you like working at such a large scale? Or maybe you don't like it. I'm just curious about the use of scale.
The use of scale to me is another expressive aspect of form. Mm-hmm. Large scale, small scale. All the scales are used by artists for artistic means, like using it for the means of making the conversation that you're wanting to have. The scale of this portrait is big enough where we can really sort of zone in and see if you are there and in front of the portrait. You can really sort of get lost in the marks and be able to see them with particularity, be able to follow the different color changes sort of closely, all of the subtle modulations of color from one spot to another, how certain spots that you would think should be one color is like, it goes into blue, or it goes into green, or it shifts into oranges. And that's what it's like painting somebody, like if I were to paint you today, Carter, and I could zoom out of this space and be into your space, and I'm in your face looking at you, what you find is that it is such a complex thing. Like, you have light coming from one side of you, it's kind of coming in. There's another light, it looks like it's coming like over. It's not that bright light. There's a bright light that's shooting a line across the back, but there's another light. And then there's all the complexity of like things around you pushing up, like showering you with light from below. Like it's your shirt, it's the table that you're near. If you're near one, it's the floor. There's all of these complex things that give us, the subtlety and what color looks like. And this is sort of an offshoot, but I had an interesting experience with a student the other day looking at Philip Guston at the Modern. And he commented that he was really trying to talk about the color, but he said, the light in this room is just not, I can't see the color for the light, like what the light was doing. And I told him that, I talked about how that was a interesting observation of how color was affected, because he talked about the light on the floor, how it was affecting the color of the painting.
Yeah.
And that understanding that complexity, I think it's a formal thing. If I painted this size, you asked about size and scale, I think you can see maybe like a little clearer and better those shifts and the brushes that are used. And then if it were a lot smaller,
Yeah.
and even though the things would be there if it were smaller, it's just a little clearer to see that. And when we see it, then it just lets us know about the complexity of a person.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to get to some of those right now. So Pablo wants to ask a question about the painting that Rising Sun, that was hanging at the Blanton for a couple of years. And many of us noticed this about that painting. There is a kind of circular spot on his forehead, these strokes of paint that kind of make an oval. And people would ask me about it. I say, I don't really know. Maybe it's just the way he painted it. But did that have a metaphorical thing for you? Was that, do you know what I'm talking about even?
Yeah, I do. It was part of the part of the form of his head. If you look at me right now in here, you can see this, like there's a spot of light right here. And right here, right down the middle of my forehead, you'll see a line. It runs from here, it goes right through here and comes down.
Yeah.
If a person were painting me, like, this sort of makes a kind of shape and this kind of makes a kind of shape. Well, Rising, when I was painting him, I could see this shape right in here, and there was a little bit of a dip that was right in there. And that's what I was trying to articulate.
Pablo, you finally have your answer. Let's see. Can you talk? Oh, this is a good question. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on behind you? Are those prints? They are prints, I believe.
There are, these are a number of lithographs that I've done. And you can see there's a number of them back there. I don't, I was trying to sort of be loose and painterly with the printing process. And the only way that you can get better at it is by doing it again and again. I was creating families and trying to be loose with the lithography process. I don't know, that's what you see. So they're all of the larger ones. There's a family with the larger ones, and then there's families with the smaller ones.
One looks like a baby. Did you paint?
Yeah, there was a baby included.
Someone asked about the Huckabyes work. Any reason that women are in ovals at least most of the time?
It is most of the time, but not all of the time. But I think generally, like, sometimes, kind of generically speaking, it's like that square shape seemed to fit me in a little better. And the ovals, if you notice, they're a little more complicated because they're each slightly different. And each of the squares are too. Like, if you look at them, the squares are each, or rectangular shapes are each a particular shape. They're not just like a stock rectangle. Each of them are a particular shaped rectangle. But a particular shaped oval is different. Like, if you look at the ovals, they're all actually particularly shaped ovals. And I think that that shape, it seemed to speak to their femininity more than the square did. But at a certain point, I didn't want that as like I didn't want to be like men are squares and women are ovals. So I broke that pattern, but that was originally a thought. Like, these the shape, it's a little more complicated, the oval was, and really like it seems like a shape that might speak to their femininity more than the square.
It's interesting you say that, because Ellsworth Kelly, he made these kinds of totem sculptures, and he considered one form masculine and one form feminine. This was masculine and this was more feminine, and in a very abstract but in some ways simple way. So Lorraine, I hope we got your question about the oval. I hope that answered it. Thank you. Who is the Harlan Crow family? They're a family. It's a prominent family in Dallas, real estate developers. And I believe the paintings that we showed, the Sonodorus and the Huckabyes, are going to be in a hotel. Is that right? That they own? So,
the Huckabyes, I believe they're going to be at the Hilton Anatolia, but I don't know about. I think that's for the Huckabyes, it will.
So hopefully we can go see it again. So someone's asking about another. Donato Loya is asking about. I guess it's another work by you. 3 forbidden F words: faith, family, and father. Why are these words forbidden?
That was the name of a show.
Okay.
And it was just a response to things like things that should be things that are good being considered as not so good. Like the whole ideal of painting about families. I've been painting families for many years and trying to deal with the issues of families, but it seemed as though many of the works that were being shown that spoke about the African-American life was about bits and pieces of families. It was about like simply stated the Black body, or simply stated, like Black males, and I felt like there's an important conversation to be had, about Black families, like, and that same thought or idea had to do with families, and had to do with the whole ideal of how fathers are seen and viewed in culture.
We have another question about family from Asia Sharad. They write, I presume that your family members aren't always able to keep the paintings you make of them, and that some of them go on to be shown or sold. How has your family responded to the notion of their likenesses being exhibited or owned outside the sphere of their own life and relationships? How do you navigate that with them? Indeed, how do you navigate that with any sitter that you paint?
Yeah, and that is correct. Like, how do you? I guess the deal is, and I thought, how do you navigate that with any sitter? But is that I paint a lot of the things that I paint start out as personal, and they end up being statements that are about larger universal themes. So I paint people I know, I paint the place that I know, but I'm hoping to have a conversation that's larger than the people that I know, and that's larger than the place that I live, even though it is the place that I live. And if you start off with that as the premise, or the purpose and the reason for making art, then that's the purpose, that's the reason you're making art. Those are the conversations that you're having, that they can be like, for instance, do any of the sitters of mine have drawings or paintings that I've done of them? Some of them do. Sometimes I'll do more than one piece, or I'll do a drawing or something, but that there are paintings that I do that are for that are of people that I know, that are of the community that I'm from, that deal with experience as I know it. That's part of just the whole notion or the idea of starting personal and ending universal.
We don't have much time left. Christian, could you go to one of the slides of the sculpture? Because you said people often ask what you're up to now, what your recent work is, and you've been doing sculpture, which I think for the first time, right, in the last few years?
Actually, not for the first time. I've been doing sculptures for a number of years, but this is the first time that it starts to take the center stage.
Okay. And
usually they've been smaller in scale. Usually I've done like one this same life size, and the medium that I'm using for the sculpture is different. The sculptures used to be made of paint, like leftover paint.
Yeah.
And when you think about scaling up like to this life size with leftover paint, then it becomes very complicated and just very hard to do. But the newspaper mache, that I found that it looked a lot like leftover paint when you use it, if you look at those sculptures. And I like that about it. And I like the fact that it was old newspapers that were being recycled, and that bits and pieces of those newspapers can be seen if you're close to the painting or the piece. So it's a way of like, recycling leftovers, which was the same thing that was true about the paintings themselves, or the paint sculpture themselves. It was recycled paint.
Yeah, they have these, you can't see it so well in these images, but they have incredible surfaces, the sculpture. It's also interesting that you're showing them with painting, which not many people do, actually. Surprising.
Yeah, and that's, I was doing that with the other pieces as well. They were smaller in scale, and usually they were shown like with paintings like these, or sometimes it could be alone, like by itself. But this was a step to put those two things together to try to create a kind of dynamism that could talk about some rather complex issues.
Great. Thank you so much, Sedrick. I think we're almost out of time. I just have a few more messages for people about some upcoming things. But thank you so much for joining us, Sedrick. This is really wonderful. And thanks for everyone who attended. We have some other things coming up that I wanted to let you know about. This Thursday, we have our Distinguished Speakers in Latin America series, Colonial Latin American Foodies, featuring Peruvian food historian Rosario Olivas, Weston, and Chef Ileana de la Vega from Austin's El Naranjo. And then we have another conversation that I'll be doing with my colleague Vanessa Davidson in conjunction with an exhibition from our collection called Pop Critico Political Pop. It's about pop figuration in North and South America. So please join us for that. That's on when is that? We have a date. Oh yeah, there it is, November 9th. Sorry guys. And then finally, if you'd like to show your support, please consider becoming a member of the Blanton today. You can go to our website and look for membership section. You can sign up for Blanton News at blantonmuseum.org/subscribe and to be in the know about what's happening. And then if you've enjoyed tonight's event and our effort to bring quality programming, please consider making a donation. We're a nonprofit. We depend on donations and for a lot of our activities. So thank you for your support. And thanks to everyone. Thanks again, Sedrick. Hope everyone has a great night.